Before we get started, know that this episode was recorded before the surprise announcement this morning of a new $2.5 billion proposed project anchored by a $1.8 billion hospital with Henry Ford Health, the Detroit Pistons, and Michigan State University in on the deal. We'll discuss in a future episode, probably Friday. I know that Henry Ford has been assembling land in the area for quite a while. Anyway, let's get to the show. Hello, friends, and welcome to your Daily Detroit for Wednesday, February 8th, 2023. I'm J.R. Stays, and today we're going to be talking about all things development in Metro Detroit. And to do that, a listener favorite and a favorite of mine, Robin Runyan from Urbanize Detroit. How are you?
I'm great, Jared. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, of course. I mean, there is just so much to get into here. And I think today we're going to do something a little different. I think a lot of people are used to us starting in the city of Detroit. I think we're going to start in the suburbs. I think we're going to start in Ferndale because there are some projects in various stages of development and pre-development that I think I want to talk about, kind of mid-rise projects that I think if they were in the city of Detroit, they would have gotten a lot of coverage. But being in Ferndale, an area that I think is really investing a lot in walkability, and we're going to hear the term transit-oriented development, things like that. I think they're of note and interesting to get into.
Yeah, I purchased a house in Oak Park last summer, and so I'm a little bit more aware of what's going on around in these parts. And part of it, these developments don't necessarily make the news all the time, but I certainly hear about them in the Ferndale Facebook groups. So, yeah, so I've been keeping my eye on them a little bit.
For sure. Now, let's start with the most concrete and then go to the most out there. And I don't want to say speculative, but not fully formed yet. So the most concrete, I believe it's something on 9 Mile, right?
Yep, it's called the Nine. It's pretty close to where I live, actually. It's a three-story, 30-unit apartment building. They officially broke ground last fall, although they already had a lot of construction going on already. So it's an apartment building. The Ferlito Group is leading it, and they're calling it a transit-oriented housing development, which is kind of cool because we don't hear that very often in these parts. But, there's a bus stop nearby, there's bike lanes along 9 Mile, there's a MOGO station nearby. Honestly, it's pretty walkable around here. You can get around pretty easily. So I think it's great that somebody's actually doing something and calling it transit oriented because, people love their cars.
Yeah. And we got a lot of good feedback when we talked about the bike trail that is running along 9 Mile there, because honestly, like, it's a really pretty amenity to have right there. And I think uses that space along 9 Mile that's kind of wider with those setbacks in an interesting way that, you said kind of gets people out of their cars. And Ferndale has definitely got momentum as far as development, and that momentum is spreading into Oak Park without a doubt.
Yeah, you can sometimes see me walking my dog along the walkway on 9 Mile. So we get full use out of it.
It's awesome. So what are the details on this Ferlito Group project? Because Ferlito Group, they've been around a while and they've done a number of things in Detroit. So that's a name that people should know.
Yeah, they've done a lot of stuff all over Metro Detroit, actually. I mean, they have some properties in the city as well that they've done. 30 apartments, three-story. There's stuff all around it. You're not going to see big parking lots around it like you do a lot of apartment buildings. I mean, they're moving right along with it. It looks like it's getting close to being done. So I would expect later this year that this would be done.
Well, and it's one of the areas of town that if you're not in the city, that actually provide a good amount of walkability, because I think a lot of people first meet Detroit and they think, oh, it's the city. It's going to be the most dense area. And in Metro Detroit, that's just not the case. And with Oak Park and Ferndale, I think it's really interesting that they're doing these missing middle developments, these middle height kind of things that it's not imposingly tall, but it adds a lot of density that allows a lot more services and things. And frankly, some additional tax base in landlocked suburbs.
Yeah, I mean, it's right by the hardware store, which I frequent often.
That's actually a good hardware store. I have
It really is.
yeah. My cousin lives right around there too. And I have used that on the way to and from for projects where it's like, oh, I'm out that way. Let me just, grab a thing. Yeah, by the way, support your local hardware stores. It's always a good thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, but there's a ton of stuff around there. I mean, there's a ton of little restaurants around here and little pocket parks they've been building, within the neighborhoods. There's kind of a lot going on around here. don't wanna talk up Oak Park too much because I feel like it's kind of still a secret to people when they're but, yeah, I kinda love it over here.
That's awesome to hear. Now, this next one is for LGBTQ seniors and affordable housing for them, which I think is interesting. There's going to be some state funding that's going to be tied to this as well. It will be on 9 Mile, a few blocks away from City Hall. So that means that's going to be on the east side of 9 Mile, a little bit separate from downtown, more on that east side.
Yeah, I think this has been in the works for a while, and this project, it's a four-story apartment building. And very much, for the senior LGBTQ community, very much like community oriented, walkability. This just got some brownfield funding last month, so they're going to be doing some remediation on the site. But it looks like they're wanting to get this done by late next year.
Well, yeah, about $700,000. Now, brownfield funding gets talked a lot about in Detroit, but it's used a lot for projects. And for maybe someone who doesn't know, can you give a quick thumbnail of what brownfield funding, in its best use case, supposed to mean?
Brownfield funding is generally used to clean up a site. If they're building something new and the site had been used before for other things. Like I've been to a site before that there was a gas station. So there were tanks underneath that they had to clean up. But a lot of sites lead to different kinds of cleanups. So that funding goes to cleaning up the site before construction starts.
Well, yeah, and I feel like that evens the playing field for developments in more urban areas because that's something that you don't necessarily have to deal with in Greenfield or you're building out in the middle of, 32 Mile Road or something and it used to be a farmland. There aren't
Mhm.
those kinds of issues. So I feel like it kind of evens things out. And, this development is getting a lot of funding from the state of Michigan and some tax abatements, and Ferndale is putting in some Section 8 vouchers. So there's a lot of intentionality around this one, it seems.
Yeah, definitely some intentionality. You're looking at the population that you have here in Ferndale, thinking about some residents that are going to need housing as they get older. This is a 53 unit apartment building. They want affordability to be part of it. They want community to be a part of it. So it's going to be a really cool project to watch.
Yeah, yeah, it's good to see that kind of care. Now, before we leave Ferndale, I do want to talk about this project that you put in the notes here. It's kind of more, I don't want to say speculative, but more the plans aren't solid yet at Livernois and 9 Mile. And, Livernois is a street that goes all the way through Metro Detroit, but it definitely there's one spot where it kind of looks like it ends and it's there at 9 Mile. I know a lot of people have skipped through that parking lot before, but this project would actually get rid of that parking lot and put in housing. What do you know?
This is where Ferndale Foods is. There's a huge parking lot there. So apparently, it's the son of the owner of Ferndale Foods who's working on this. It would put a four-story apartment building right in that lot. So it would make use of a space that's really not being used right now. So I'm looking forward to see what this does because it would add a lot more density. And we're seeing that a lot in Ferndale. They're taking spaces that aren't being used and they're building them up. And it's what a lot of people want to see in downtown Detroit too, in a lot of places. So I'm going to keep my eye on this one. And it looks like they're just kind of in the discussion phase right now with the planning commission and the city. So we'll keep an eye on it.
There's just already a good amount of residential density in there, and adding a little bit more, I think, kind of increases the kinds of businesses that can be there. Obviously, you'll have people able to walk to Ferndale Foods, but then you've also got a number of markets, retail shops. You're easy to get to downtown Ferndale with that. It seems like that Bauhaus, I believe that's what it's called, project has been pretty successful near, I think it's Planavon and 9 Mile. And it really is interesting. I was in downtown Royal Oak last week for the soft opening of Hopcat, and I hadn't been there at night in a while. And it was one of those things where you're like, oh, there are buildings here. There are, the buildings aren't as tall as downtown Detroit, but I
Mhm.
think these are the kinds of things that there's just so much density there. Like when I think about parts of greater downtown that still have giant holes in them, it doesn't feel like that's what's happening in this kind of like Southern Oakland County situation. It's like we're going to actually build up and kind of densify what's already happening.
Yeah, and it's kind of cool because a lot of the houses around here are small anyway, and they're kind of smaller plots of land. So you're really creating a lot of density, even more so by adding apartment buildings and making use of all these spaces. It's pretty cool to see.
So, speaking of a part of town that has a pretty big hole in it right now, that is the area behind Huntington Place in downtown Detroit, the convention center. We touched on a little bit in a previous show, but I know we wanted to talk about it a little bit more in depth. What's happening there, or kind of what are the plans to happen? Because the race is on to get hotel rooms built in time for the NFL draft and a number of other things. And when I looked at the notes on this, I was just like, wow, this is going to be, I think people need to understand like how big of a deal this hotel is going to be and how much scale it is. Even if they do the minimum of 600, but if they do 800 rooms, kind of in this old Joe site, it's kind of crazy.
The site we're talking about is the old Joe Louis Arena site, and right now there's currently a 25-story residential apartment building being built there, and that's going up fast. Like, every time I look, there's just more and more floors going on. So, that's going up quickly. The Sterling Group is running that development. Not super open with all the plans that they're doing, but we know they had wanted to also do a hotel on that site. And last week, with the Detroit Regional Convention Facility Authority, they got into an agreement for this redevelopment to add a hotel, which would be 6 to 800 rooms. And I know the convention center, they really wanted those added hotel rooms. They're busy anyway, but they're just going to keep getting bigger events, into the city, which is really exciting. And for me, I really love to see just this riverfront just expanding, down the West Riverfront. It's so exciting to see what's happening right now because you hear plans for a long time, but now you can actually really see it happening. So you got the residential tower, you got the hotel going up, you go down the river a little bit more, you got the riverfront towers, and then you get the big park that's going up on the West Riverfront. So it's going to make a huge connection into Corktown. You can go right along the riverfront. I think they want to move pretty fast on this. So we might start seeing things, happening pretty quick with planning and approvals. It's not just the hotel that was approved. There's a couple other things. They're gonna do more parking or different kind of parking at Huntington Place. They're gonna add another huge ballroom, so even more events that they can hold there. And they're going to extend 2nd Avenue down towards the river, which our readers at Urbanize are very excited about. They get excited about things like this. So yeah, it's kinda cool to see. And I think that we're gonna start seeing this move pretty fast.
As someone who's been around downtown Detroit for many years, there's been riverfront towers there for a long time, but there really wasn't connective tissue to make that riverfront truly usable in a smart and kind of beautiful way. And now with the addition of the park, the addition of these residential units, the hotel, it starts to make it more contiguous, which I think if there's anything, like one of the issues in Detroit is that we don't build contiguously. It's like we make an island and then we like
Mhm.
connect it with a road or something. And Riverfront Towers is the perfect example of something built as an island. The Rensen built as an island. And that's not a very
Mhm.
sustainable way, in my opinion, of making things or sparking additional growth. For years, the only reason you'd come to that little section of downtown, which should be prime real estate, was if you're going to a Joe Louis game and Joe Louis Arena didn't have a window to save its life, which is, real disappointing as far as the design. But that was a different era in Detroit thought where you had people who were afraid of the city. And now we realize that opening things up is the way to go. And it was always the way to go. But when you had decision makers not focused on, investing in that more sustainable way and just being like, okay, well, we're just going to build a barn and it's just going to be what it is, like on the riverfront, this block. I think you can tell from my voice, I don't have much love for Joel Arena. I never did. It was not, I appreciate the Red Wings and all of that, but as a structure, I never had the love for it that I did, say, Tiger Stadium.
I mean, it wasn't super pretty.
No,
Like,
no.
yeah.
And it doesn't remind me of the nostalgia. I never got to go to the Olympia, but the Olympia at least seemed to be undersized, but have lots of quirks and character. Julius Arena was basically like a shipping container in a weird space with like air conditioning in it. Like it's just nothing
Yeah.
to write home about except for the wonderful memories of the hockey team.
Mhm.
So I think that this is exciting. I also think there is a bit more freedom on this site because this was acquired through the bankruptcy process. And because it was, there's a lot less kind of say on what can happen because this was part of the trade to help settle the bankruptcy debts.
Yeah, and this has been a long time coming. It really has. Like, we've been waiting for this to happen for a while, and I think the hotel was, like, the original intent, and then there was a hold on that for a while. And now they're able to kind of see that things are like we're able to sustain that again, even more so right now. I know we mentioned it last time on the show, but I just think that hotels are the story of the year. Like we're just going to see a lot happening in terms of building, renovating buildings, turning them into hotels. Current hotels that are under renovation, we're getting news on that too. So we're just preparing for bigger and better things.
Yeah, because there's money going into the Book Cadillac Hotel. There's money going into the Doubletree, which is I didn't realize was owned by Dan Gilbert, but it is. I always know as the Millender Center, but that's because I'm hashtag geriatric millennial. Um, but yeah, there is a lot of investment in that. And speaking of larger projects, let's talk about kind of how this new vision of District Detroit is coming along. You mentioned in an article, which I will link to in the show notes, that we could be seeing a groundbreaking as early as July. So I feel like, although there's been like a lot of discussion about how much and all these other things, I feel like a lot of this is there may be changes on the edges, but a lot of this is a formality. At least this first round of buildings or building, they're very hot to get this done.
Yeah, I mean, they want to get started. They got a lot to do, so they want to get going.
Mm-hmm.
This week, we may get some news, probably soon after this comes out, because the Detroit Brownfield Redevelopment Authority may be voting on this week. So we might hear about that soon. What's going on right now is the big, big tax thing, the transformational brownfield tax capture, the $616 million over the next 35 years. So this is kind of the first step, the Detroit Brownfield Redevelopment Authority. There was a public comment hearing earlier this week, which I guess there was a lot of comments, as there are at all of these, which is fine. If and when this gets approved by them, it would go on to city council, then it would go on to the state. And if they get everything lined up the way they want to break ground in July. And I believe it would be the office building in front of Comerica Park.
Well, that would be unmistakable and kind of like a very visual sign as the baseball season
Kidding.
rolls on to see that, right? Because that's going to be on all the TV cameras. We can't miss the positioning of that and what that's going to look like, especially in front of a national audience. Real quick, what are your thoughts on it getting passed? Do you think that it's likely that it's going to basically get passed as is, or do you think that there are some things that are going to stick? What's kind of your thought? I know you've attended like a couple of these meetings.
I mean, I think there will be some back and forth going on, but I mean, they always get passed. We've seen enough at this point and they always go through. That's what I think.
Yeah, one way or another, that's kind of how the things tend to go around here. There was a community recall effort I read about the other day for one of the council members, Scott Benson, but I had a couple people forward it to me, and I'll remember, and these people were all in their 20s, and being, again, hashtag geriatric millennial, recall efforts almost never work. And we think about this town, like of all the things that whatever people can say about Scott Benson, voting for this is probably like among the least controversial things he's done. And if you think about Gabe Leland, who literally pleaded guilty to a crime, he didn't leave council until the very last day, and there was no recall thing for him. So yeah, like I tend to be more of like a realist with this, with the difference between what the internet says and kind of like the path of development and what's happening on the ground. I sometimes feel like they're two separate things, and people are loudest when they're unhappy, if that makes sense.
Oh, for sure. And, I know that there is a very loud, understandably critical voice in this because, what have we seen in the past from Olympia? We've seen them say all these things and not go through with it. But as the two of us have said, quite a few times, this one's a little different. It's not just Olympia. They got related companies on there and it's a big plan. I said I expect maybe half of this stuff to get done. I would love all of it to get done. Who knows? So I think we'll start seeing stuff happening in July on the ground. I mean, if it's in front of the baseball park, that's fine because honestly, I don't think we're going to have much of a baseball team to watch this year. That's another episode, Jer.
Yes, and we will definitely have you back for that. Before I let you go, I did want to note that the sale of Joel Landy's old properties, he passed on recently, and his properties have kind of been up in the air as far as ownership, what's going to happen, all that kind of stuff. And we now know that they have been sold, and this is also in Urbanize, detroit.urbanize.city. that 55 of the properties are going to be going to 3 developers. And yeah, it's pretty interesting to see that, because when I was in Brush Park the other day, I went to Cafe Alto and I looked across the street and I saw like the sign for Joel Landy's properties for this beautiful 2-story white building that is right there across from Cafe Alto.
What one you're talking about, yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, this would be amazing if something could happen with it, but nothing can happen with it until this stuff is settled. And Joel's properties are in various states of repair, but it's the kind of thing where I look at that and I go, of course that should be a row of restaurants or retail with residences up top, or you do something like I've seen in some other cities like Columbus where you keep your lower level and then you build up above it. You know, I think about there is a building that I wrote about, years ago, and still nothing has happened to it, that the Illich's own, right next to the Addison there, like on that Woodward Row. And that's a perfect candidate for, you know, you keep the front of it, you keep a lot of the historic items that are left, and then you build up. You know, I've seen that in other cities as well, kind of like a merge of old and new. So like there's different things that could be done, but nothing could happen until these got sold.
Yeah, and it's so funny you mentioned that building on Woodward because I've been asked about it so many times, and it's like, I don't know. Like, it's like, I don't know everything. But this honestly, I don't know if you saw a couple weeks ago, there's a program in Southwest Detroit for people who own like 2-story, like ground level storefronts and then residential on top.
Mhm.
So it's like an incentive for them to renovate the residential properties, get people moving into apartments that are livable there. That's a prime location, that building in Midtown that you're talking about, to get, you know, a little bit more happening on the street and some of those apartments in use again would be awesome.
Well, yeah, we still have a pretty big supply problem, you know, when it comes to places, and there's still a lot of demand to live in and be in downtown Detroit. And it's the kind of thing of when I think about when people move to Detroit, a lot of people would really prefer to be in something that has a connection to the area as opposed to a completely new build. You know, there's so much additional that comes with Detroit that part of the charm and part of the energy is, oh, this place has a story, or this place has a connection to something, you know, because you get a new build anywhere, you know?
Right. And every time I talk about Detroit, because a lot of my friends live across the country and they see what they see about Detroit. But when I talk about buildings, they're really invested in it because they see, wow, there is a history. There's this beautiful architecture. You know, we want to see it in use. So hopefully we can get more of that, you know, keep it going.
It is always great to have Robin Runyan from Urbanize Detroit on the show. If you want to check out her work, detroit.urbanize.city. Always great updates. If you've got feedback for this show, dailydetroit@gmail.com. Also, open to your tips, whatever you want to tell us. We want to know about it. Anyway, for now, I'm Jer Stays. Thank you so much for listening. Remember that you are somebody, and we'll see you around town.